important component of the definition of an endocrine gland is that it is ductless.
You need what?
The term duct is spelled D-U-C-T, not D-U-C-K. You wouldn't believe how many people put D-U-C-K. Meaning that their secretions are not excreted into a duct and carried to some local opening or lumen. Instead, their secretions are released directly into the extracellular fluid where they're picked up by the bloodstream. So they don't have a duct. They're released directly into the bloodstream. Okay? Now, these secretions, which are released directly into the extracellular fluid, we call these hormones. Whereas an exocrine gland is not going to release secretions directly into the extracellular fluid, but instead they'll be carried by a duct. The definition of a hormone: a chemical substance secreted into the extracellular fluid that regulates the metabolic function of other target cells within the body. What constitutes a target cell? A target cell is simply a cell that has receptors for that hormone. So typically, the circulation will carry that hormone throughout the body, and the hormone will bind to any tissues or cells that have receptors. These hormones are usually either amino acid based or they're steroid hormones, meaning they're derived from cholesterol. They're typically either hydrophilic or lipophilic. Now, if they're hydrophilic, water soluble, then they're typically going to interact with receptors on the surfaces of cells. Okay. Why? Because they can't pass through the lipophilic cell membrane. So, the way they impact the activity of the target cell is through what's called a second messenger pathway. The first messenger is the hormone. But through its interaction with the receptor, it's going to generate production of a second messenger. Let's see how that occurs. This receptor is linked to what's called a G protein. It's called a G protein because it's going to be linked to some nucleotide. Typically, it's GDP. Well, when the receptor is activated by the hormone, GTP, instead of diphosphate, triphosphate, displaces the GDP. Okay? And that little chemical interaction then allows the G protein to be released. The G protein then interacts with this here enzyme, adenyl, or some textbooks put adenylate cyclase. It simply catalyzes the conversion of ATP to cyclic AMP. And cyclic AMP is your second messenger. Okay? So, the hormone's the first messenger. When it binds to the receptor, it causes changes in the G protein, allowing it to be released and to activate adenyl cyclase. And that leads to production of cyclic AMP. Now, cyclic AMP is going to activate a protein kinase. Kinases are typically enzymes that phosphorylate other substrates. That substrate can be a protein within the membrane, for instance, a protein channel or a protein carrier, or it can be an enzyme within the cell, within the cytoplasm. But when that protein is phosphorylated, then it changes the activity of that protein carrier or that enzyme. So it may open up that channel, or it may activate that protein carrier. For instance, if it's a protein carrier for glucose, then the binding of insulin, okay, it may activate that protein carrier and allow glucose to be taken up by the cell. So, protein kinases, by performing phosphorylation, they trigger some activity within the cell. So this is the way water-soluble hormones work. If, on the other hand, a hormone is a steroid hormone or a lipophilic, then it's not going to bind to a receptor on the surface, but it's going to pass right on through that cell membrane, because it can do it. That's the way it rolls. It's going to bind instead to a receptor located inside the cell. It might be within the cytoplasm, or it could even move through into the nucleus. But regardless, that complex, the hormone bound to the receptor, is, if it's not already within a nucleus, it's going to pass through a nuclear pore, and it's going to induce, it's going to turn on a gene. Okay? So that particular gene, that component of the DNA, is going to get transcribed and then translated. All right? So in other words, with transcription, you take that gene and the instructions that are encoded on it, and you transport it onto a messenger RNA molecule. Then that messenger RNA molecule is going to leave the nucleus, attach itself to a ribosome, and it's going to be translated into a protein that's going to have some activity, okay, that's therefore influenced by the hormone. Okay. Now, this is a list of endocrine tissues. Typically what you'll notice is that the ones that are called glands, pituitary, thyroid, adrenal, pineal, these are organs where the only function is production of hormones. Okay? If that's their sole function, they're typically called an endocrine gland. There are other organs, like your basic gonads, that generally aren't referred to, for instance, as the ovarian gland or the testicular gland, because they do other stuff. For instance, in the case of gonads, they produce gametes. That's just a little more up. Easier one. So the idea is that all of these tissues, and there are more, produce hormones. The pituitary gland, it's also called the hypophysis, is considered the master gland. It's considered the master gland because it regulates so many different functions within the human body. In a sense, it controls our activities and our metabolism. The pituitary gland can be subdivided into two components, an anterior lobe and a posterior lobe. The anterior lobe is made up of true endocrine tissue, meaning that it's derived from epithelium. Remember way back in the day in AMP1 where we said epithelium is either a covering epithelium or the epithelium is glandular epithelium. Okay. Well, in this case, the anterior pituitary is glandular epithelium. It's made up of epithelial cells that produce and secrete hormones. Where in the case of the posterior pituitary, it's not really made up of glandular epithelium. It's made up of nervous tissue. In fact, it's composed of axons that have descended down from the hypothalamus. Axons whose cell bodies, whose nuclei, remember the nucleus is a cluster of nerve cell bodies, whose nuclei are located within the hypothalamus. So, in the case of the hormones released from the posterior pituitary, those hormones are actually synthesized in the hypothalamus and then are carried by axonal transport down to the posterior pituitary, where when the signal is released, then these hormones are released. So there's a big difference between posterior and anterior pituitary. Now, notice that the pituitary gland is suspended from the hypothalamus by a stalk. You can call it the apophyseal stalk, but nobody calls it that. So don't do that. Instead, you can call it the infundibulum or pituitary stalk. Nobody uses the word hypophysis much anymore. Now, there's a lot more to this story in terms of embryology, but when you take histology sometime in your life, you'll learn a lot about the pituitary. We just don't have time. This is a list of the major pituitary hormones. With respect to the anterior pituitary, there is a classic mnemonic that will help you to remember those hormones released from the anterior pituitary. The mnemonic is flat pig. Notice I use a little lowercase I. Okay. And so this mnemonic helps you to remember these 6 major hormones. The F stands for FSH, which is an abbreviation for follicle stimulating hormone. The L is an abbreviation for LH, which is an abbreviation for luteinizing hormone. The A stands for ACTH, which is an abbreviation for adrenocorticotropic hormone. The T, TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. The P for prolactin. The I, it's lowercase, doesn't mean anything. And then G, growth hormone. How many people here love dogs? Raise your hand. Yeah. Wow. All right, I'm going to do something special for you people. I'm going to allow you to substitute, instead of flat pig, you can make this flat pump. Okay? That might help you more.
I thought there was flat peg.
You can do flat peg also. All right, so if
Like
you're,
I thought that the E stood for something.
I don't know what the E would stand for. I don't know what that E would stand for. I just don't know.
Okay.
I mean, you could, because there are other minor hormones that just don't come to mind. Maybe. For instance, there's a melanocyte stimulating hormone that I didn't include because it's fairly minor. Now, some of these hormones will be referred to as tropic hormones or tropins. But these are simply hormones that stimulate production of other hormones by their target tissue. So, for example, TSH is going to travel down to the thyroid gland and stimulate release of T3 and T4, which are thyroid hormones. So then TSH is a tropic hormone or a tropin. In fact, I can call it thyrotropin. Yeah, if I wanted to. Same thing with ACTH. ACTH is going to target the adrenal cortex and stimulate release of adrenocortical hormones. So I could call this one corticotropin. That gets up there, corticotropin. I can call FSH and LH gonadotropins. Meaning they stimulate the gonads and trigger release of additional hormones. It's kind of like that. With regard to the posterior pituitary, you need only to remember 2. Oxytocin and ADH. ADH is called antidiuretic hormone. You're all experts in that one already. What you may not have realized is the old name for this was vasopressin. When they first isolated this hormone and conducted clinical research, they found that in the laboratory that vasopressin stimulated smooth muscle contraction, particularly the smooth muscles surrounding blood vessels. They brought about vasoconstriction. And in fact, within physiologic ranges, the ranges that are typically found within the bloodstream, ADH has some weak vasopressor activity. At high doses, typically doses above what's typically found, it has more potent vasoconstrictor activity. But its primary purpose, its more important role, is the reabsorption of water from the DCT and collecting ducts. Oxytocin is special. Oxytocin is special for so many reasons. Number one, it has two different target tissues. It stimulates both the mammary glands and the myometrium. Myometrium is the smooth muscle within the walls of the uterus. Okay? So that's one reason. It's got two target tissues. The other thing you need to remember about it is of all these hormones, it's the only one that's regulated by positive feedback. Positive feedback, where the rest are regulated by negative feedback. So let's do a little contrast here. For negative feedback, I'm going to use TSH, okay, which is produced by the pituitary and the thyroid gland. Okay. I'm going to include in my drawing the hypothalamus. Now earlier I said that the pituitary gland is the master gland. But the release of its secretions is actually controlled by the hypothalamus. So when I write my book, I'm going to say that the hypothalamus is the master of the master, because it controls release of the secretions by the master gland. How does it do so? It does so by the release of either releasing hormones, or sometimes these are called releasing factors, or in some cases, inhibitory hormones or factors. Okay? For instance, in order for the pituitary to release TSH, which is also called thyrotropin, the hypothalamus has to first release thyrotropin releasing hormone. Then TSH is going to target the thyroid gland, and it in turn is going to release thyroid